My name is Beth White, and I am a training associate with the Institute for Community Inclusion at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. For those of you that are joining us for the first time today, the Minnesota Transformation Initiative is made possible through a grant from the Minnesota Department of Health of Human Services and in partnership with the Institute for Community Integration at the University of Minnesota, the Institute for Community Inclusion at UMass Boston, our partners Strengths at Work LLC, and the ARC of Minnesota, among other consultants and partners. This initiative is designed to help organizations expand and increase competitive integrated employment and quality community life engagement outcomes. Part of the MTI project includes these quarterly trainings where we focus on themes related to organizational transformation and best practices in employment and community services. This project does have a landing page. The PowerPoint will have hyperlinks to resources as well as our landing page where you can learn about upcoming trainings, opportunities, as well as view promising practices and stories. So a lot of information. We encourage you to check out the website to learn more. So MTI uses a research-based framework to support building provider capacity and provider transformation. And if you're new to us today, this graphic will be new to you. And so it demonstrates the 10 essential elements that are focused on facilitating a holistic approach to provider growth and change, understanding that these elements they all intersect and impact one another, and that real change and transformation requires a full, holistic, and comprehensive approach. The community life engagement guideposts that we'll be digging into today really get into the service design and delivery of employment and day services and outline the 4 key considerations for building quality services that will produce high quality outcomes for people that are accessing supports. We have several folks joining us today as presenters, and we will be formally introduced to each throughout the presentation, but I just want to acknowledge and highlight who we will be hearing from today. From the CLE in Action team, we have Jen Soleski. From the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire. And from the Institute for Community Inclusion at UMass Boston, we have Stacy Jones and Jamie Timmons. And representing Minnesota providers, we're going to hear from Andrew Dimenstein from MSS and John Waters from RISE. Really full agenda today. We're going to hear from a lot of people and hear some great information. So here's a look at what we are going to talk about today. We're going to start off with an overview and introduction to community life engagement. We're going to be learning about a key resource, which is the Explore CLE Toolkit, and then taking a deeper dive into learning about the CLE in Action project before hearing from 2 providers currently participating in the CLE in Action project. There will be time for questions before we wrap up, and the final slides in today's presentation offer ways to learn more about CLE, CLE in Action, as well as upcoming opportunities with MTI. And again, quick plug for a very brief survey that we'll provide to you at the end. And now I will turn things over to Jamie Timmons.
Okay. Thank you, Beth. Hello, everybody. So we are going to start today by explaining what we mean by community life engagement. And then I'm also going to share some about our community life engagement toolkit, which is the central output of our work to date. So what is community life engagement? It's all the ways that people, both with and without disabilities, access and participate in their communities. When we talk about community life engagement, we are talking about an outcome, not a service, not a support, not a program. And we are talking about an outcome that is complementary to employment and sort of advocate that the two are always in connection with one another. And then we believe that community life engagement can happen with or without paid supports in the community. Next slide, Beth. Or Heather. Thank you. All right, our community life engagement toolkit. Or our CLE toolkit. This is really our central repository of all of the resources, strategies, provider stories that we have collected and written about to date. And the purpose of the toolkit is for providers to have a place to go to improve and begin thinking about considerations for how to deliver high quality supports that will lead to more meaningful community life engagement outcomes for people. It's important to note that the toolkit was the culmination of research, and I'm going to go through a timeline. This is important because we did not come up with this ourselves. This is a result of speaking with experts, providers who told us what's important to be thinking about. The research findings over a long period of time came together to result in what we call our 4 guideposts for community life engagement. These guideposts are really a roadmap for providers to always be thinking about what we think are the critical elements necessary in the provision of supports to sort of lead to those meaningful outcomes. The guidepost came from case studies with providers across the country who were doing this well. And again, it's like they informed us rather than us informing them. There's also a state agency self-assessment, which is really a framework for state IDD agencies to support providers in the development of services that lead to community life engagement. And then a fidelity scale, which is, an interactive online, really a self-assessment. And I'm going to circle back to that towards the end of my portion of the presentation. And then an individual learner course, sort of out of all of this work, we translated it into a series of trainings for provider staff. And I'll end my portion of the presentation with a little bit more about that learner course. Next slide. Okay, so here's our timeline. You can see that we started in 2001, and Jen Selesky, who's on this call, really should be doing this portion of the presentation because up until the line here in this timeline, it was really her leading this work. So we designed a module for our National Survey of State IDD Agencies. We then, if you're moving into 2004, this was Jen's dissertation, case studies with providers who were delivering both community and facility-based non-work services. And then there was sort of a shift that happened in 2014, 2015. This is where I jumped in, where we started to do expert interviews. We got new funding. Started to identify providers who were doing promising work in this area. It's also where we made the shift to stop calling this community-based non-work and start calling it community life engagement. After the expert interviews, we moved into these in-depth case studies where we selected providers and we went out and we shadowed them and we spoke to everybody. And those resulted in our guideposts that I'm going to walk us through and our toolkit. And we then piloted the toolkit with providers across the country. And after that, we received another cycle of funding to develop the fidelity scale and then test that scale. So the reason for this timeline, and then Jen's going to pick up because we're in the midst of some current work as well that continues this timeline into the present. But, the reason we shared this slide is that this is 20 years of research that has led us to this content that we're going to share with you today. And that's important for us all to remember. Next slide. All right, so let's get into these guideposts that I've been talking about so far. Guidepost number one is individualizing supports for each person. We need to not only understand and acknowledge people's personal preferences, but we need to honor them. We need to know what their individualized goals are, what their interests are, what their skills are. And how do we do this? We need to be implementing comprehensive person-centered planning and discovery, just like we would for employment. And, it's important to be honoring people's preferences, um, so that we can do things like group people creatively. When we went out and we shadowed these provider organizations, because I mean, we clearly can acknowledge that one-to-one supports in this area are like very difficult to pull off anywhere. So what providers were doing well were they were considering where people had similar preferences, people had similar interests, and so they would be making sure to group those people together so that they could align activities, community activities with their interests and preferences. And then also these providers were creative in the way they staffed and scheduled support for community life engagement. They really let go of the traditional day services model and thought about evenings and weekends, and were very creative in how they supported people to access their communities. Next slide. So guidepost 2 is promoting community membership and contribution. What do we think about when we think about this guidepost? We need to start with the setting, right? We need to start with the context. So we need to talk about inclusive, integrated settings and activities. We don't want to take people who might be interested in sewing to a sewing class with just people with disabilities in that class. We want to be thinking about our own presence as supporters and making sure that we are not limiting connections with others in the community. And so this makes me think about the concept of supporting from behind. It's, knowing when to kind of step back and allow those natural connections to take place, as they would for any of us out and about in our communities, and in some cases, even try and facilitate those connections. As the third bullet says here, we want to be placing value on community membership and participation versus just community presence. Community life engagement is not about being physically present in the community. It's about looking for opportunities where people are feeling a sense of contribution. And in the best cases, it's giving back, honestly. I've talked to many people with disabilities in the context of community life engagement, and the most powerful stories I hear and where people really share how impactful their experiences were is when they were in the role of provider, if they were volunteering or they were doing community service. And that role really got turned around for people who with disabilities who are often kind of the recipients of help and support to be put in a position of contributing was really powerful. And then, of course, aligning those membership opportunities with the individual's interests and preferences is super important. Next slide. Alrighty, guidepost 3 is about developing relationships and building skills to decrease reliance on paid supports. We need to, as providers, be always thinking about intentionally building people's networks to expand their access to natural supports. I think we think about this in employment all the time. We think about and know the power of networking as it relates to job searching. We know that natural supports can really fill job coaching gaps or transportation gaps when it comes to employment. And we need to be thinking the same way about community life engagement. Similarly, we need to always be thinking about fading supports when appropriate. Again, we think about this as it relates to job coaching, right? I mean, our job coaches stay involved, build people's skills, and start to pull back. And it's just as important not to over support people in the community. It's really the same. And then teaching specific skills to help people access their communities and employment. I think of this as building human capital. So natural supports and networks are people's social capital, right? Now we're talking about people's personal sort of skills and helping people to build those skills so that they can more independently access their communities, and fading becomes more and more realistic. So it may be that we're talking about teaching someone to use the bus to get to a community activity. It may be that we're teaching someone to be able to find their community calendar of events. You know, where's the farmer's market? Is there something for the 4th of July holiday coming up that I might want to do? So, how can we teach people those skills so that they can own those and provide opportunities for us to fade? In guidepost 4, our last but not least guidepost, we need to ensure that supports are outcome oriented and regularly monitored. What does this mean? Well, it starts with understanding each individual's goals. What we were finding from the providers that we went out and shadowed in these case studies is that they identified skill building goals for each person. And then what they would routinely do is check in on those goals and say, are the activities we're engaging in the community doing the things, Sally wants for herself? Are we getting to the right place? And so having those clear expectations and the guidance is super important, and understanding whether or not what you are doing is, successful. How do we measure success? I think a lot of providers are starting to think about strategies for collecting satisfaction data from people about their community life engagement experiences. But it doesn't have to be that complicated. It's really just about asking people, are you satisfied with what we've been doing together? Is this what you envisioned for your community engagement experience? And then again, it's like always each of the guideposts sort of circle back to employment. We need to maintain the expectation that if people are of working age, community life engagement is a pathway to employment. It can lead to employment. It can ultimately build social connections and networks that broaden employment opportunities. It can provide career exploration opportunities, or it complements employment to create a full life for people. And then next slide. All right, so I had said I would circle back towards the end of my portion of the presentation to the community life fidelity scale, engagement fidelity scale. All this really is a simple self-assessment tool. It's designed for providers. It's designed for all levels of staff within provider organizations. It can be taken at any point in time. The link is down at the bottom of this slide. It's in our toolkit. And it can be part of training or technical assistance, but it doesn't have to be. And we ask that people fill out this scale based on their perceptions about their non-work services and how they're structured and delivered. So it's really an opportunity for providers to start to think about this topic, if nothing else. Start to think about where your strengths are as an organization. Start to think about where your gaps might be. Use it to help you to identify your priorities. Here's where we want to start. Oh, this whole thing about these guideposts sounds very overwhelming. Well, this could be a place where you start to say, oh, let's start to, we're doing great with person-centered planning, but let's start to think about how do we build those social connections. So it allows you to really think about your alignment with the guideposts. And the last bullet, I would even say all levels of staff can take it, but all levels of staff should take it, because what we often find is differences in perceptions about how supports are delivered when you're asking direct support professionals versus management. And that's important for providers to know too. And then my next slide, I think might be my last slide. Yep. So we are also offering, as part of Explore Community Life Engagement at ICI, this training course. And this is the first. We will be announcing a second one shortly. The first one is a series of 4 lessons. They're self-paced, they're available for purchase. These are really designed with direct support staff in mind, and it's about building those strategies and building that confidence at the direct support level to be able to support people to achieve more meaningful outcomes as it relates to community life engagement. So we dig into topics like person-centered planning and how do you really support outcomes and monitor those outcomes and map resources, strategically and intentionally as it relates to each person. And then, how do we, as we go about our daily work, always be thinking about relationship building and natural support. So I encourage people to check that out. Thank you, Stacy, for popping those links in the chat. And with that, that's the end of my portion of this presentation. I'm going to shift to Jen Selesky, who will continue that research timeline and project timeline and talk about some current work we are doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yep.
So I'm happy to be here today to talk about community life engagement in action. As Jamie said, this is really an extension of that 20+ year line of research and project activities. But this project is, it's a 5-year project specifically focused on knowledge translation, which is how to take what we learned from all that research and the tools that we developed and put them into action with service providers like yourselves. So we're always happy to come talk to a group like this about this opportunity. And so this is, as I said, it's a 5-year project. It's funded by the Administration for Community Living, and it sits at the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire, which is where I work, but it's a very close partnership with UMass. And we also work with Anchor as there's an important recruitment and outreach partner on this project as well. So next slide. So as I said, this is a knowledge translation activity, the project. The goal is to use knowledge translation activities to bring CLE tools and resources to service providers. And we have 3 main ways that we do that. One is the National Community of Practice on CLE. That's sort of our flagship project, and I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. The second one is the quarterly Lunch and Learn webinar series. We've got one of those coming up on July 15th, I believe it is. And then we also send out a monthly e-newsletter, which uses micro-learning, which basically just means it's a short newsletter. You can read it in a few minutes, look to see if there are any items of interest, and move on with your day. It's also worth noting that the Lunch and Learn webinar series is also half an hour. So these are things that are really designed for people who are doing the work on a day-to-day basis to be able to fit it into their days and do a little bit of learning and get practical, actionable tools out of these. So next slide. And then some of the other things that we're doing, we're creating an implementation guide for organizations that want to run their own community of practice on community life engagement. And we're always looking for partners who are interested in trying out that guide. So if you know any organizations that might want to do that, let us know. We give conference presentations, we do webinars like this. We've been expanding and revamping the CLE Toolkit website that Jamie talked about. And then we also have an advisory group that includes predominantly self-advocates and service providers that's been really helpful in guiding our work. So next slide. So going back to talking a little bit about the community of practice, when we applied for this grant, we said, we're going to host the community of practice, and we didn't have a real specific vision for what it was going to look like. But then right around the time that we were launching it, we learned about Project Echo, which is a really cool approach to hosting communities of practice online. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means, but really at the center of the Echo model is this all teach, all learn philosophy. So there is a team, a hub team at the center of the ECHO community. That's our grant team and some of our subject matter experts that we rely on. And we share information with the participants in the ECHO community of practice. They also share ideas with each other. And the idea is that then those participants are able to benefit the whole community, all the people that they're supporting, even other service providers in their area, by spreading the word about some of what they're learning. So next slide. And some of the principles of Project Echo are using technology to leverage scarce resources. So it is an Echo community of practice is by definition an online community of practice that actually comes out of the medical field and trying to get specialist information out to doctors in rural areas who don't have that specialist access. So it's totally online. One really important, unique part of it is applying case-based learning. So each of our sessions includes a case scenario, which I'll talk about more in a second, but that's really an important part of the interactivity, in addition to sharing best practices. And then we're also always evaluating, collecting feedback from the participants and trying to improve on our experience for the community of practice. So I mentioned the case presentation. That's really part of the model, is this pretty specific 60-minute meeting structure that we follow. So it starts with a brief didactic presentation that basically means an expert presentation, either by one of our team members or by an outside presenter on a specific topic area related to community life engagement. So for example, we have a meeting on each of those 4 guideposts where someone talks about how they are putting that guidepost into practice in their work. And then after that 20 to 25 minute presentation and a few minutes for Q&A, we shift to the case presentation part of the meeting, which is where one of the participants in the community of practice will present for 2 to 3 minutes about a case scenario, some sort of a challenge that they're running into in their community life engagement supports. It can be either an organizational type scenario, like we're trying to figure out how to embed this in all of our training, or it can be an individual type scenario, like we're supporting this individual and there are some behavioral challenges to getting out in the community that we're trying to manage. And then really where it gets, I think, the most fun is in the case discussion and recommendations. So we take clarifying questions and then we take recommendations from both the participants and the hub team and subject matter experts. And that's really where inevitably it really gets into the specifics of what are some specific tools or approaches, or have you tried this or that? And it's really great to hear those conversations going back and forth. So next slide. Okay, so I got mine done really quick. We'll be coming back with more information though on how to join that community of practice. That's the thing I wanted to make sure to wrap up with. We're just wrapping up our 2nd year of the community of practice. It is something that you need to complete a brief application when we select 15 service providers each year to participate in it. We've had great representation from Minnesota so far, and I'm hopeful that we'll get more people applying this year. So there's a July deadline for that, and we'll share a link for how to complete that application to be part of the COP, which will start in the fall. And so I'm going to hand it over to Stacy to talk some more about the Minnesota angle.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you to Jamie for sharing about the research and the history on ICI UMass's work related to community life engagement, and a little bit about the Community Life Engagement in Action project. As Jen said, I'm going to now shift things back to Minnesota for the remainder of our time together. If you haven't already gotten some of the theme here, that there are a lot of intersections with a lot of different bodies of work across multiple universities and multiple provider organizations. So this is really our attempt at helping to highlight how some of those are intersecting right now. But before I move forward, let me just introduce myself. For those that don't know me, my name is Stacy Jones. I also work for the Institute for Community Inclusion at UMass Boston, and I support both of these projects. Among other projects, I work with Jen and Jamie on the CLE in Action project that you just heard about, and it has been my pleasure to support organizations across the country to participate in the community of practice that Jen talked about. And in particular, something that has been beneficial for me to observe has been the all teach, all learn principle that Jen described. And in particular, the use of this scenario-based learning. So organizations bringing scenarios to a community of practice, a challenge they might be experiencing, something that they would like some recommendations on. I find it has been very helpful to participate in that. And along with supporting that project for the last 4 years, I've also supported the Minnesota Transformation Initiative. Beth shared MTI's mission at the top of the webinar, but here it is again, just as a reminder. And if by chance this is your first time joining one of these calls, we'll of course make sure to also put in the chat a link to MTI's website so you can take a look at all of the resources that we're not going to touch on today. Beth, you can go to the next slide. MTI does many, many things, but one way that we support this mission that you just saw on the slide is by providing training like today's quarterly training, as well as providing what we would call more intensive training and technical assistance directly to provider organizations in Minnesota. One of the ways that we do that is through what we call our cohort technical assistance. And I'll just describe very briefly what that looks like. But essentially, once a year, MTI opens up an application process for interested employment providers to submit an application. A group of provider organizations are chosen to participate in a year-long cohort, which essentially means they're following along the same timelines together as a group. And on the screen, there just are examples of the types of activities that our MTI staff engage in with organizations over that year's time. So typically, if it's an organization we haven't worked with before, we try to do an on-site visit with the organization to get to know them a little bit more, better understand their home communities, better understand the culture in their organizations and what they'd like to accomplish through their year of technical assistance. And we use that information as well as information that we get by interviewing key staff at the organization, building an individualized technical assistance plan that then we use to guide our time together with the organization. We schedule regular technical assistance calls with leadership and other staff in the organizations. And as much as possible, we try, when it's appropriate, to match up staff from one organization to another through peer-to-peer mentoring. And we think that's one of the most effective ways that organizations can learn is by hearing directly from other people doing similar work in Minnesota. We also have and host a monthly community of practice where we get together with all of the organizations in that cohort technical assistance, where they have the opportunity to share information, hear from each other about challenges and successes, and celebrate all of the good things that their organizations are accomplishing. They also have access to all kinds of different trainings and resources based on the needs that they have. And each of those organizations also gets access to a leadership essentials course, for middle managers, because we find in our work with organizations that middle managers are really key to success of organizational change and helping to implement all of the great things needed to support employment and community life engagement for folks with disabilities. And you can go to the next slide, please. And again, this is another graphic that Beth showed early on when she kicked things off. But now that you've heard a little bit more about the 4 community life engagement guideposts, just wanted to show it one more time because I think this puts into better context what Beth talked about. As a reminder, we at ICI UMass and as part of the Minnesota Transformation Initiative, we use these 2 different toolkits, the 10 essential elements of provider transformation and the 4 community life engagement guideposts and the toolkit that Jamie talked about. We use them together, and Jamie talked about thinking about employment and community life as complementing one another. We're not talking about community inclusion by itself. Again, if we're talking about people of working age, we really want people to be working, but these things definitely complement each other. Next slide, please. And we are really thrilled to have 2 organizations join us today to talk about their experiences. First, they both have received some of the more intensive technical assistance from MTI that I just talked about over the last couple of years, but they also are both members of the current national cohort of community life engagement in action that Jen described earlier. So again, these projects are intersecting in real time. It's been my pleasure to work with both of these organizations over the years. So we've asked them today to share a little bit about themselves, about their organizations, and how participating in the CLE in Action project has been beneficial to them as a provider organization. Particularly as both of these organizations are going through some sort of organizational change efforts over the last few years that focus on increasing employment and community life engagement outcomes for the people they're supporting at those organizations. So we're going to hear from Andrew Dimestein, and he's a program director at MSS. He's going to kick things off, and then he's going to pass things over to John Waters, who's a program director at RISE. And then when they're both finished talking about their organizations, we'll open up for questions for both Andrew and John, or for Jen or Jamie, before we do some last announcements and getting you guys connected with resources in the chat. So you can move to the next slide, and Andrew, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for the introduction. As Stacey said, I'm the program director over here at MSS at our Shoreview location inside the Twin Cities. Just a little bit about MSS here. MSS is a nonprofit organization that supports adults with disabilities. We started back in 1949, so we've been doing this for quite a while. Over the years, we've changed our name. It used to be under the United Cerebral Palsy Foundation. Now we shifted it to Midwest Special Services back in the 80s. But anyways, we operate 7 different locations across the cities. We support approximately 600 individuals across those locations. We also have a volunteer board of directors as well, just to kind of like a super high level to kind of help lead innovation and adaptive considerations. Also, we empower the people we support to live the life they choose by providing opportunities and developing partnerships built on collaboration and community engagement. Next slide. So, about MSS's goals. So, recently we shifted how our goals are structured for our organization. While we still have like an overarching goal of operationalizing employment services and supporting people to become other communities, for my center specifically in Shoreview, we had specific goals, which are listed here on our thing here, of developing 2 volunteer sites, making sure that staff will apply CLE and CIE knowledge in programming, and then 100% of service coordinators, which is our title for designated coordinators, will get hands-on experience with employment and CLE, and all staff will receive training on CIE and CLE. Next slide. So How it's going. We have a couple lovely pictures here. The picture on the right is actually of us volunteering at a local food bank called Optage. It's rather close to our center, so it's not too far of a drive for us. But we started really, really small with our community engagement. So how small, you might be asking? Well, right now we're doing one volunteer site once a month, with the intention of eventually building that up and building tolerance up. Right now, we don't have a ton of drivers, so starting where we can is important to us. Related to my designated coordinators, they have all received in-person opportunities for trainings from our employment team. So we had our employment specialists come to our center from different parts of our organization and just kind of go over what they think about when they're helping people get jobs in the community. And then in addition to that, because our organization also does employment services, we were also able to create opportunities for our designated coordinators at my center to go shadow employment opportunities in the community. Let it be a supportive employment, shadowing an employment specialist as they're supporting somebody who's independently working in the community. So, as I previously stated, remember to start small. Building relationships with small businesses around our center was also another way how we were able to create better and more meaningful opportunities with the people we support. We're very fortunate that we're really close to a couple restaurants. Because we don't have a lot of drivers, as I previously said, a couple individuals we support, not a lot, small groups, with one staff will walk over to restaurants, or if we're near a thrift store too. And we're also near an art gallery, and they'll just walk over whenever we can, and just hang out, chat with people, get to know people on a personal level, obviously on a professional level as well. But it's been super, super wonderful just to see that those natural connections just start to develop. One of the people who actually works at the thrift store up the hill from our center, because of our routine visits, actually came down the hill and just offered to come and volunteer with us. She's like, hey, how can I get more involved? What do you need from us? We've had a similar interactions with different businesses as well. Just hanging out with people and getting to know people. We also have been, for our entire agency, working on creating our own trainings based off the information that we received through the toolkits through MTI and ICI. So right now we're doing 30 to 45-minute trainings monthly with all staff in all of our different locations. Yeah, so and how we're kind of phrasing these trainings is we're putting language and structure to things that they're already doing. And by framing it that way, we were able to get better buy-in from our collective staff, because a lot of people don't realize that they're doing discovery with somebody they're supporting. It's just conversation, right? But when we're putting framework around it and we're framing it in a nicer way, people are understanding that every interaction can be part of something bigger. Next slide. So, how have we learned from using the CLE in action in our organization? A couple key points is language. Language is a huge thing that sometimes we, just as humans, we don't really think about, but it's super important. Conflict management. This is that. The toolkits has been helpful for us for job carving, learning what that is, informational interviewing, personalizing connections, and just a bunch of other resources that the toolkits have to offer, such as I remember getting this one document where it was a bunch of animals to help people understand how they deal with conflict, and that was just super cool. Or little diagrams that describe what is fixing versus supporting a situation, or various different thought exercises. All are wonderful, truly, as well as general information about how to facilitate training and presenting employment to teams and staff. Next slide. So who would benefit from participating in a cohort like this? Honestly, anyone and everyone. Something that I think I told Stacy at some point when we were just chatting a while ago was, I feel like this is the community practice is really a lifeline for providers nationally, just to understand, like, hey, am I nuts? Is anybody else experiencing this? And the answer is usually, yeah, this is what I've done for this, or hey, I've had something similar to that. So it's very, very, very helpful. I really don't think it needs to be a specific type of person in an organization. I think really anybody and everybody can benefit from this. And really, we don't know what we don't know until we know. And I think that's something that's important for us to be vigilant about. And I think that's our last slide for MSS. Leave.
Thanks, Andrew. We're
Yeah,
going
no
to pass things over
problem.
to John.
Hello, thank you for having me. John Waters, I'm a director of program services for RISE, Life Enrichment Services on my side. Got a couple of quick slides here just to say a little bit about RISE, our mission of unlocking potential and opening doors to success for people with disabilities and other challenges through creative solutions and customized support. We are serving 6 counties in Minnesota, as well as St. Croix County across the river in Wisconsin. And we do also provide housing services in central Minnesota. We're in our 53rd year here at RISE. You can see we serve about 2,500 people at over 25 locations. And you can see some of the varied populations that we serve there as well. Go next slide. We get into the story here. So RISE was probably about 2020, right around then we started really getting to seriously think about ending our subminimum wage production work certificate, which we had been doing a lot of, and very challenging, of course, right? Because we're doing so much of it. We have so many people involved. How are we going to continue to enrich the lives of the hundreds of people that dropping that certificate would affect? And so about 2022, we started engaging with Stacy and her team, MTI and ICI, to look at getting the technical assistance, as she referred to earlier, about ending the use of our certificate and how to pursue better things for our people from there. And so they assisted us in charting our course of transformation, allowing us to look at, how we're going to double down in community employment rather than in-house employment, and really chart our course again and how we're going to look at building robust community connections. Looking at, again, their experience is of what's a good way to go about it, how to get the most out of strengthening our person-served, our person-centered decision making, our supported decision making, and how to engage with employers, how to figure out those transportation issues. So very meaningful. Seemed like a year. It seemed like almost 2 years. A long time. A lot of check-ins. Very meaningful technical assistance. We'll go to the next slide. I'm going to talk about a couple of my takeaways from the community life engagement cohort that we are currently in, along with Andrew. We started in December and we'll be wrapping up soon here the next month or two, I believe. A lot of this goes back to the subject matter experts that are involved in the CLE cohorts. We talked about, this is some of my favorite ones. We talked about meaningful life training, how to help your organization pursue what appeals to the person. What is it to support their goals? Understanding that support needs require creative staffing, creative scheduling, not just what fits into your typical 8 to 3 day and what maybe you're providing your funders rather allow you to do. We talked about connecting people with community through shared interests. Starting simple. What are the interests of your people? How do we go out and connect with the community? and their direct communities to get them to be involved. We talked about developing a relationship by expanding natural supports, decreasing supports of paid supports, right? I like the idea of building human capital. That was an idea of one of the subject matter experts, building the skills for the people that encourage them to have social connections. And that skills that people can always work on. We talked about emphasizing goals rather than processes. Again, kind of like I said, going back to what the person wants, getting creative, not just having a service that is based on the state payment plan and what you're given to operate with. Getting creative and going outside the box. Go to the next slide. This is just one I like to throw in. One of my favorite examples of how we're helping somebody connect in the community. This young lady standing up here is somebody that we've known for years as we were working production, in-house production. Always had crafting hobbies. Would bring her things in and share her things all the time. And so as we moved away from that in-house work, as she's looking for employment, we had a case manager on site that really kind of took dedication and connecting with the person, and talked about for at least a year and a half about how can we get you out there? How do we get you to share your interest? And so we just ended up, just connecting with craft shows, really. And it kept building and building, and her parents who were sitting there were very supportive, enough to bring this young lady to craft shows, help her set up, get registered, and just a great story of how she went from finding that niche and those community connections that she didn't have while she was working in our sites. Next slide. And then, finally, some of the other benefits of participating in the CLE cohorts. You kind of get the double entity of every monthly meeting we have. Is great. You get the subject matter experts, and then you get the providers providing those case studies as Stacy was talking about. And those discussions are great, and it's great to be able to connect here, in Minnesota, having people from Pennsylvania to Washington, Hawaii, down south, all have similar issues, right? So being able to talk about things like persons being denied services, or persons being denied supports by a guardian, navigating restroom use in the community, the big one Andrew and I have been working on, online vulnerabilities of persons served, rural community, limited engagement in rural communities. How do you go about working through that? So the connection with the other service agencies and the shared experiences, again, was pretty dang cool. So loved it. I think that's my last slide. So
Thank you, John. Thank you, Andrew. And we're going to open things up for questions for Andrew, for John, Jen, and Jamie. And you can feel free to type in the chat if you have a question. You can raise your hand. But while people think if there's a question, I have a question, and you started to allude to it a little bit, John, is even before we knew that you guys were going to be both sharing your stories on this webinar, you guys shared that your organizations are partnering on some problem solving related to restroom usage. Would one of you or both of you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I'm happy to talk a little bit about it. So part of getting people out in the community and just also helping people become off their communities, it is important for us as providers to acknowledge that there are barriers, especially for folks who have higher medical needs. Most of the population that I support in Shoreview do have higher medical needs. We were considering, while we're trying to, how can we help people stay in their communities longer and just have a wonderful experience, was bathroom use. And as many of you probably know, across the country and maybe in different states, there's really limited options for folks who have who might need a universal changing table, right? And so what we did is we MSS reached out to Rise and just kind of pitched them the idea of like, hey, if in a pinch, if we can't find the resources that we need in the community, and we need to use the bathroom and your location's closer than my location, is there any chance and we could just go and use your restroom really, really quick, and then we could stay in the community longer? And Rise was open to the idea. And so between MSS and Rise, we developed a document called a Memo of Understanding. And a Memo of Understanding is just saying like MSS will be liable for MSS staff wherever they are and MSS facilities. Rise will be responsible for Rise staff and Rise facilities. And that also just opens up this like network of providers across the Twin Cities who are happy, able, and willing to sync up that initiative of helping people be of their communities and really champion community membership.
Thanks, Andrew. It's
No
just a
problem.
great example of, one of the things that John just talked about in the CLE in Action cohort is just the problem solving, the just speaking out loud of things that come up. And I don't know that any one person has all the answers to anything, right? But there is value in getting a bunch of people in a room together virtually, or if you happen to be in the same city, like Rise and MSS, getting together in person perhaps and talking about what are your barriers and what can we do to overcome them. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's a really creative idea. Just going to pause for a second and see if we have any questions before we move on. Okay, it looks like no questions right now. You still have time, so if you change your mind, feel free to type in the chat. But again, we've mentioned two projects here, so I want to just go back and make sure that everyone has information about both of these. So Jen talked about the Community Life Engagement in Action project. Rise and MSS are both currently part of the current cohort, but I'm going to put a link in the chat that will take you to the project homepage. And there are a couple of ways you can stay connected. One is you can just join the monthly newsletter. Okay. If you just do nothing else, you can be part of that newsletter. We send out information once a month about the project, things about community life engagement. It's a very, very short e-newsletter, not anything too lengthy. You can also join our quarterly 30-minute lunch and learn webinars, where our team invites all kinds of subject matter experts from across the country to present a little bit of bite-sized information about community life engagement during a lunch hour. I'm also going to put a link right now into the chat where if you want to register for next month's quarterly training, you can do that, as well as see the rest of the CLE in Action information. And as Jen mentioned, we are now currently accepting applications for the next Community Life Engagement in Action cohort, which will begin in October of 2026. So I will also pop that link in the chat if you're interested in learning more about it, if you're interested in applying. Lots of links for you guys. Okay, and next slide, Beth. And then finally, for folks that may be new to learning about MTI, again, you can go to our website and find out more information about MTI, about how we're funded, about all the different ways that we support Minnesota related to building capacity for employment. Same thing, you can join our newsletter, you can find resources. We've got some success stories that you can read and some videos. You can register for future trainings like the ones that you're part of today. And MTI is also currently accepting cohort technical assistance applications until June 26th. So lots of information that we just threw at you, but again, you have access to these links. You can take your time and review them at any time. And I'm going to pass things back to Beth for closing comments.
Thank you, Stacy. Before we get there, there was a question that was added into the chat.
Oh,
and I can
sorry
read
about
it out
that.
loud. It says, have you seen, and I believe this is for John and Andrew, I'm assuming, have you seen any friendships developing between someone you support and a community member?
John, you want to go first? If not, I can.
Yeah, I mean, I have the most significant one I could think of is, we have a smaller town in our area that has a pretty active Chamber of Commerce, and we're members of the chamber, of course, in that area. And we got involved in a couple of events, just city events, and the chamber was involved. And we have one individual who's just super friendly and outspoken, and he has developed a relationship with the head of the chamber, and it's great for us because continue to allow us to plug in and go further and further with that relationship. And I know those two see each other outside of events, so it's been great.
As for my center specifically, I can't say that we have had a massive success story as a community membership, but I feel as though we are well on our way for helping those connections along and just kind of fading supports. But no success stories yet, but we are very confident and we are very excited of the direction we're going in.
Thank you both. All right, we will wrap up here today. We are going to have our next MTI quarterly training will be in September. Stay tuned for the topic and the presenter. More information to come. I strongly encourage you when you're checking out the MTI website, if you have not already signed up to receive our monthly e-news, that's a great resource, and that will bring you all the latest, especially on our quarterly trainings. So check that out. Lastly, if you could take a moment to scan this QR code. Again, this is an extremely brief survey, 2 questions. Would really love your feedback, not only on today, but also any topics that you would like to see covered in future trainings, topics that you are interested in learning more about. I will leave this slide up for a few moments. In the follow-up email to today's session that you will receive tomorrow, in that email, you will receive a copy of the presentation slides as well as a link for this survey. If you have any trouble accessing it today, you'll have another opportunity tomorrow. And we will also include all of those helpful links in the email as well. And we will just end by expressing our gratitude for everyone who presented today and for all of the work that's happening on CLE in Action and all of the folks in Minnesota and beyond that are working to move this forward. We thank you, and we hope that everyone enjoys the rest of their day, and hopefully we will see you back here in September for our next quarterly training. Thank you all.